All right, what are we here to talk about today, bro?
Heavy metal.
Heavy metal. Ooh, like heavy metal music?
Yes, heavy metal music. We're doing music reviews now.
Yeah, I know we're not there yet. Thankfully, those will just be awful. If you think the movie reviews are awful, we get some music reviews. No, we watched the classic 1980s animated film Heavy Metal. We had both seen it before. I've seen it a few times over the years. I haven't seen it from forever. This is probably the first time I've seen it in about 10 years.
It's been a while for me too.
So what can you tell us about it, bro? What was you?
Well, I mean, back in the day when I watched it, honestly, it was hard to follow.
Didn't make a lick of sense.
Didn't make a lick of sense. But watching it now, like, it's like a fine wine. It got better with age, you know?
I honestly find you understand the story more the older you get.
Yeah.
And a lot of people always say, oh, you should watch this film intoxicated or inebriated or however you want to get yourself there. And I'm like, no, it actually, you really need to watch this film sober.
Because you'll understand it better.
Yeah, I know, because everybody's like, oh, this is one crazy trip kind of movie, man.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I get that. Maybe if you're in your early 20s and you had nothing better to do.
It's like a brick on the wall, right?
Yeah, but I feel like you get more out of it the older you are and the more sober you are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As opposed, because some movies are movies you really have to get like drunk or high on to watch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's because those are those type of movies, and those movies have those kind of like cult followings because you watch them and you do that and it makes it better. And if you were to watch that movie sober, that movie would be horrible. But this isn't that kind of movie. This is a movie I honestly feel like, honestly anybody would enjoy.
Oh yeah, I definitely enjoyed it.
I can see how it would be hard to make this kind of movie nowadays.
Oh yeah,
for sure.
Oh goodness.
With the level of gratuitous nudity and sex in it.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people would be, oh no, you can't do that.
Yeah.
Women are the greatest things since sliced bread.
Well, they are. It's true.
But like it's honest. It's like it's sorcery and fantasy, and like when people are in these high octane situations, like high octane things are gonna happen.
Yeah.
You can't sugarcoat it. You can't be like, oh no, they're just gonna be friends, or they're not gonna have sex, or everyone's totally gonna keep their clothes on in this situation.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, they wouldn't. But if you're trying to make this film nowadays, they would find every excuse in the book to make sure nobody took their clothes off, to make sure like no sex happened, and if it did, you couldn't see anything.
Off screen.
They would have done everything in their power to emasculate every man in this movie, and put over every woman in this movie. Like Harry Canyon, like 100%, like the first story where the broad tries to double cross him in the end. They would try to make Harry seem more of a sleazebag.
Yeah.
So when she double crossed him at the end, it'd be just rewards, and he would be the one that dies.
Yeah.
Instead of it going the way it did.
Yeah.
Oh, also spoilers alert. Sorry, everybody. Spoilers.
If you haven't seen it, go see it.
I was gonna say, if you haven't seen this movie, it's 40 years old at this point. So I'm hoping you had watched it before you watched this review, or if you don't care about spoilers and you just are here for the ride and just here to listen to us explain and talk about this film, then good. I'm glad you're here. I hope you get something out of this, and I hope you actually go watch this after the fact, because it is a solid movie. But getting back on track, like the Harry Canyon story, like as I said, that they would have completely changed it. Like, as soon as I was watching this, I'm like, okay, first off, like she wouldn't have gotten naked. They wouldn't have had sex.
Yeah.
And somehow they would have turned him into more of a simp, and he would have had to go sleep on the couch, and she would have got his bed.
Yeah.
And they would have made him, as I said, seem more sleazier and dirtier, and to where like he was just human repulsion, absolute garbage.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then so when she chose to double cross him in the end, she would have done it for good reason.
Yeah, because he deserved it.
And then she would have killed him, and everyone would have been fine with that. That's that. As soon as I watched that story, I'm like, that's exactly how that story would go nowadays.
Exactly. Yeah.
And also too, like Tarna, like that story about Tarna at the end there.
Yeah.
It would have been ruined in today's standards, because Tarna is an amazing story. It's about a warrior goddess who doesn't have to say a word, who gets what she wants, kills who she needs to kill, and is just one totally amped up badass chick, right?
Yeah.
Like she's like the epitome of like a female barbarian hero.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
but
Red Sonja kind of.
If that were made nowadays, she would have far more armor covering her entire body.
Yeah.
She wouldn't be as scantily clad as she is.
Yeah.
Which I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad idea for that storyline.
Yeah.
But the flip side is, how she was completely silent during the entire segment. She did not say one word.
Yeah.
Today she would have been the epitome of a hipster millennial, and she would have been talking and jabbering and throughout the entire thing, saying the most annoying, cringeworthy crap you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yep, the millennial hipsters would have totally ruined that character.
Absolutely.
She would have been, instead of going from being a stoic, iconic character to an annoying character, you just couldn't wait until the story was over. And she wouldn't succeed through her own deeds and hard work. She would succeed by, failing upwards. That's exactly how that story would go.
What's your favorite scene in the movie?
Scene? I don't know.
I got two.
I don't know what scene. You know what? I really love the scene where Tarna is at the bar. Yeah. And those three mutant guys come to hit on her. And then she takes her beer mug and cracks one of them right over the head with it.
Yeah.
And then gets up and takes her sword out and chops off all three of their heads.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite scenes. Another favorite scene in the movie. It's hard. Why I love that scene, because it just shows how strong of a character she is.
Yeah.
Like, she doesn't need anybody to protect her.
No.
She doesn't need, the big, strong, strapping man to come in. She doesn't need, a quippy sidekick.
Yeah.
To alert her of danger. No,
danger's coming.
She takes care of it all on her own. And another scene in the film I liked.
My two are you sure you can drive this thing? Yeah, man, I can do this. All you gotta do is let your hands do the work.
Oh, where the stoners are flying the spaceship? Yeah. That was
and
funny.
The other one was, I have the power.
Oh, I know. There's a scene in the Tarna storyline where she's got her sword and she's holding it up to the sky, and electricity comes down to charge it to give her power. And we're watching this and we're like, no, the guys who did He-Man, the Masters of the Universe, totally didn't rip that off from here whatsoever.
Absolutely not, no.
But another scene. You know what? It probably would have been the B-52. Yeah, the B-52 sequence where the guy after he parachutes. I couldn't think of the word parachutes. Parachutes from the plane and lands on the abandoned island.
Yeah, okay.
And then you see all the old wrecked aircraft start opening up, and the zombies start coming out and coming onto him. I love that scene because to me it feels like something out of an old EC Comics kind of vibe, and I just loved it.
Yeah.
I loved the B-17 sequence. Like that the whole zombie airplane one.
Yeah, okay.
I just, even though it's like the shortest storyline in the entire film, I think it's only several minutes, if that. And there's not a lot of dialogue, and it's just basically a World War II pilot running from a bunch of zombies.
Yeah. And
escaping from his plane onto that desert island and thinking he's safe, and realizing, oh no, there's a bunch of crashed airplanes on this island, and sure enough, they're full of zombies, and they're coming alive, and they're coming after him. Which
I don't even
but
remember.
that part. See, okay, this is another part a problem I had with the story. Remember, because it was supposed to be the green orb Lochnar bringing to life.
Yeah.
The Lochnar was on the airplane.
Yeah.
And the airplane didn't crash on the island.
No.
So there's no reason for those zombies on the island to come alive.
Well, because he's done it before.
I know, but
that's the only thing.
It's a stretch.
Yeah.
It was a cool sequence when he got on the island. And you think he's safe, but he's not. But they established the only reason those zombies came to life in the first place is because the Lochnar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But then again, you did see the Lochnar kind of flying around at the beginning of that sequence, so you could kind of excuse it.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe the Lochnar had brought those other planes down,
Or maybe he
and
traveled there
reanimated them before.
Yeah.
So you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, you can kind of, but to me, it's stretching it a bit.
Yeah.
It's almost as bad as the ending of the film.
Yes.
Which is the only true, I think, weak point of the entire movie, because the Lochnar is basically telling the story of how the previous Tarna defeated him in the past.
Yes.
And he's trying to, like, tell her reincarnated version, like, you know, you're not going to win, and this is how it went before, but it's not going to go this way. And his whole intent was to kill her before she matured, so she wouldn't transform into the next Tarna and kill him again. But the whole thing is, he still somehow blew up for no reason. Because at the same time his past version did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like it like
because it established that he's back.
Yeah, I was gonna say you could tell like this movie was written in the heyday of everybody being high.
Yeah.
Just not high on their own.
But then when he dies in the past, he dies in the present.
I know. It's like it's like
guys through it all
clearly
time.
These guys were just not high in themselves, but were clearly inebriated by substances back in the day. Mm-hmm. Like you can tell everybody was just out of whack, because if anybody was, you know, sober and had any common sense when they were doing that ending, they would have looked at it like, oh, this ending doesn't make a lick of sense. We really have to rewrite this.
Yeah.
Or have some kind of correlation, like somehow maybe like he's telling the story and somehow like the past Tarna you know, somehow is able to connect with the reincarnated Tarna and show her how to take out the Lochnar. And as he's telling the story, she does the exact same thing, so that's why he blows up in the past and the present kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like there would have been more connective tissue there.
Yeah.
Instead of the way they did it, where he's telling the story and he just blows up anyways.
It's like,
and and she escapes. He's not able to kill her, but he was able to kill her father, no problem, at the beginning of the story by just coming out of the box and melting him.
Yeah.
But the entire time, he didn't kill her. He just decided to tell her some fables.
I'm going to tell you a story about how I'm going to kill you.
Instead of just killing you and telling the story to your corpse. Which would have made far more sense.
Yeah.
But part of the big problem with me about that framing story is initially that wasn't supposed to be the framing story, where Grimaldi comes down in the car to the planet and drives up to his house and goes and shows his daughter. Initially, Grimaldi, like that beginning part was supposed to happen, where Grimaldi was supposed to come down to the house from space and go in and find his daughter. And the framing story wasn't going to be like the Lochnar as it was.
Yeah.
The framing story was going to be like a carousel, like a merry-go-round, like a carousel.
Yeah.
And her dad, when he got home, she would want to go play on the carousel. So her dad would take her out to the carousel, and there would be a bunch of different I don't want to say rides, because a carousel is just one spinning thing. But there's a bunch of different animals and characters she could ride, like a car and a flying animal and all that. Yeah. And and an airplane and stuff. So what she would do is she would go ride one of like the vehicles or animals, and then it would open up the story. Yeah. And that's how they were initially going to bridge the story until it got to the final story, which was her story, and told the story about Tarna. And I don't think initially she was like the Lochnar was going to kind of be like this energy being or something. It was going to be very similar. Yeah. But she would end up having to defeat a big bad in the end. But she would sacrifice herself in doing it. And it would turn out that her father really wasn't her father. He was more of a guardian who was protecting this young girl who came into his protection kind of thing, or into I want to say foster care, but there's another word I'm looking for. But you know what I mean. But so basically, he was her guardian, and he raised her until she got to this point where she would basically activate and reincarnate her old self into her new self. Yeah. And that's what would happen at the end of the story. She would have turned into the new version of Tarna and rode off like she did. Yeah. And like his job would have been done. He would have been her caretaker. He would have helped raise her to get to this point. And now Tarna would be reborn, and the universe would have a new champion to protect it in this new generation. Yeah. And I felt like that story made more sense, and it would have made more sense in the end. because I feel like when they changed that bridging story, that's why they ran into that problem at the end, and they just didn't know how to get out of it.
Yeah.
And instead of making like the Lochnar like the continuous connecting piece, just like have it be a bunch of short stories until you get your final story, which is your most meaningful story.
Yeah.
Which then connects back to the bridging story, and then we understand this is basically, you know, the father telling her a bunch of stories until it gets to the point where it's like, okay, this is you in a past life. This is what essentially your life is going to be, and then she gets reincarnated into the new Tarn, and as I said, becomes the new savior of the universe.
Yeah.
I feel like that would have been a better bridging story.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And in retrospect, when you look back on it, it's like, yeah, you guys totally made a huge mistake by going with the Lochnar capping story the way you did. It should have been the merry-go-round, because it would have also had a little bit more of an innocence and awe to it.
Yeah.
Even though the stories were really dark and gritty and edgy, like at least the bridging story would have been a lot softer and more innocent, and it would have been like a nice breather in between stories.
Yeah.
Instead of having this harsh story and then coming back to this harsh interconnecting narrative.
Yeah.
It would have been a nice breather. Yeah.
Screaming and
it would have been a nice breather in between stories, right?
Yeah.
And you could have had more, and because there was a personal connection, because it was the little girl and their father, you could have had more dialogue, a more personal one-on-one, and it would have been a much more emotional ending to the story, because he's basically having to let go of his daughter and let her become something else.
Yeah.
And essentially it's almost like the nesting story, where she now becomes an adult and leaves the house to go live her own life, and the parent has to let go of the child.
Yeah.
And realize the child's grown up now and has to let them go free into the world.
Exactly.
Like a baby bird flying out of the nest kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I feel it would have been a more of an emotional and impactful storyline if they went with that narrative and ended it like they were originally supposed to do, instead of the way they did, because it, as I said, like they ran into problems with the ending when they decided to change the narrative framing story. And I didn't feel the framing story as is was impactful as the original version.
Yeah.
And it's, it's like one of those things where somebody probably like came in really high or whatever. So, oh, I got this great idea. This is the miracle, man. What if it was this glowing orb Lochnar thing that was going to kill her and blah, blah, blah. And everybody goes, oh, that's so cool. Let's do it, man.
Whoa, man, that's fantastic.
This is probably a very Cheech and Chong moment. And then, looking back on it 30, 40, 50 years later when you're sober, and it's like, oh, yeah, we really should have went with the merry-go-round storyline.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that doesn't make a lick of sense, does it now? No, it doesn't. Whose idea was that? Oh, I don't know. Like, nobody wants to take credit for it at this point, right? Oh, man. But yeah, I loved it. It was great.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, because it was the Harry Canyon storyline. What was the second? Oh, the Den, which I liked. The one where John Candy was voicing the main character. He was that geeky 18-year-old guy who found the green orb, and then was transported to that alien world where he was mutated into the giant muscular heroic man.
Yeah.
That was a good storyline. Yeah. They did change that, because as far as I remember, because some of these were actually based on comics from the Heavy Metal magazine, and other stories were original creations.
Right.
The Harry Canyon story was an original creation. The Tarna story was an original creation. However, it was inspired by us. It was very loosely inspired by a story by a French artist called Mobius.
Yeah.
Based off a story he did called Arzak. And I say very loosely, because it was basically like you could say Arzak inspired Tarna.
Yeah.
Instead of like where Arzak completely ripped off Tarna. Mm-hmm. Which there's another story I'll get to in a second. So there's that one. So that's an original story. Because they initially wanted to do Arzak.
Yeah.
And Mobius told them no. Like he wouldn't allow them to adapt it. And then so that's why they came up with Tarna. It was like, okay, we don't want to completely rip this off, but we want to do a story similar that's inspired by. But they went in a very different direction with the story.
Yeah.
The only thing you could say was basically some elements from that world, like how it was kind of set up, this post-apocalyptic wasteland kind of world. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is the bird she flies is very that they're like the lizard bird thing she flies is
Yeah.
very reminiscent of the lizard bird thing Arzak flies.
Yeah.
If I forget if his character's actually called Arzak or not, or if it's just a town, but whatever. But the main character in that story, the lizard bird thing he flies looks a lot like the lizard bird thing she flies.
Yeah.
That's kind of like one of the more major rip-offs they did for that story, but
Yeah.
but they could get away with it because they changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas there's another story which they slightly changed, but I don't feel changed enough. That B-17 story
Yeah.
is based off a story Dan O'Banion did
Yeah.
from back in the day, but they weren't zombies; they were gremlins.
Oh, okay.
So basically, the whole thing was the pilots were fighting off a bunch of gremlins who had made their way onto the ship
Okay.
and were killing the crew.
Yeah.
And then the pilot would escape in the end and land on the island and find the island filled with gremlins.
Yeah.
And of course they changed it because now they went from being gremlins to being zombies, and
Yeah.
the zombies being caused by the Lochnar, so they changed the crux of it.
Yeah.
So it's a somewhat original story, but I know they ran into legal issues because Dan O'Banion, who wrote it, did die, but like his estate went after him about it.
Yeah.
Because they tried to do like original stories based off the short story in the film.
Yeah.
But that short story in the film is really heavily based on like that Dan O'Banion story.
Yeah.
And basically all you did was flip gremlins for zombies.
Yeah.
But the crux of the story is the same. So it's like, so there's a lot more legality issues with that one.
Yeah.
Whereas like they changed a lot for Tarna, so it wasn't a complete rip-off of Barzak.
Yeah.
And Harry Canyon is an original story. Den is actually a story taken from the comic, but as I said, the thing they changed with Den was Den was not like it was. If I could be wrong, and I apologize. Somebody in the comments, leave a message if I'm wrong on this. But in the original Den storyline, Den wasn't like an 18-year-old geeky kid who found the magic orb that transported him to the land.
Yeah.
It just started off as Den being a character in the story kind of thing. Like that part didn't happen. It was just basically the story about this kind of somewhat dumb, heroic, muscular hero just, fumbling his way into the storyline kind of thing and having to be like a heroic savior along the way. I think so that part was changed a bit to try to have it fit with the whole Lochnar narrative.
Yeah.
So they added that piece, and of course some of the comedic dialogue with John Candy having that inner monologue when he's talking about his character, which I don't think was there.
I didn't think I was that good.
But it's okay. It was a fairly faithful story otherwise. But that's in my other thing with the Lochnar. It didn't have a very set, a set amount of rules. You know what I mean? It changed based on the story. Certain people could touch it. Other people would touch it and die and melt. It could change sizes. It can change what it was supposed to do, like with the Den storyline where it was this teleportation device.
Yeah.
Other stories where it was like basically like nuclear plutonium.
Yeah.
One story where it's, the size of a basketball. The other story is the size of a marble. And the final story is the size of a comet.
Yeah.
It was always changing variables about what it could and couldn't do. And just not with the whole size thing. Like with the whole size thing I could excuse. Maybe it could grow and shrink.
Yeah.
But I felt like there needed to be a set limitations and set rules of what the Lochnar was and could do.
Yeah.
So but basically it felt like the Lochnar more or less just became this empty MacGuffin that they would use to help connect the stories together.
Yeah.
Which brings me back to the whole carousel framing idea.
Yeah.
And when they decided to change it for the Lochnar framing idea, it's clear that the Lochnar framing idea wasn't as thought out and planned out as the carousel one is.
Yeah.
Because the carousel one makes a lot more sense. They had a lot more going for it. And if you see some like the deleted scenes and the deleted script notes, it's a far more fleshed out bridging storyline. Whereas the Lochnar storyline feels very rushed. Doesn't feel very planned out. It feels very tacked on, and you really kind of see it with them having to try to find a way to force the Lochnar into every story too.
Yes, yeah.
Right. So it's like, as I said, I like the concept of the Lochnar, but I felt like the Lochnar should have been its own story contained in the stories.
Yeah.
It shouldn't have been the thing that bridged the stories together.
Yes. Yes.
So that's my major complaint.
because it ended up being.
But
nothing
yeah,
in
because
end.
the ending is just
It's like-
so messed up. That's why I say with the original bridging story, it makes more sense
Yeah,
with the
absolutely.
carousel, and with it, her father being her guardian,
like, this
who's
thing's gonna
raising
come
her
back.
to get her to the point of where she needs to be, and like sending her out in the world.
Yeah, it's
like,
this
it was
thing's
it was
gonna
a
come
far
back,
more
Get
meaningful
ready to
end.
fight it.
Yeah, it was a far more meaningful end than the one we got.
Yeah.
But that being said, no matter what, like the final product, the final version of Heavy Metal is an amazing film.
Yeah.
And I recommend it for anyone checking it out who hasn't.
Yes, I definitely do as well.
You got any more thoughts on it?
No, I think you've pretty much said anything that can be said.
Yeah, I think we talked about all the stories, didn't we?
Give or take.
Give or
Sure
take.
we missed one.
Because yeah, it was Harry Canyon, and then what was the second story? The second
Isn't that Den?
Dan. So yeah, Dan. The third story was the B-17 story. Oh no, the third story I believe was the Captain Stern story, where the guy gets the marble Lochnar and turns into the Hulk and chases down the space captain guy.
So you got
The
thanks
fourth-
for the money. Oh no!
The fourth story was
The B-52s?
B-17.
B-17s, yes.
And the fifth story, I believe, was... What was the fifth story? Oh, it was the... I forget what the actual story's called, but it was the one where the aliens come to recall the robot that's on Earth at the Pentagon, and they accidentally take him and the secretary to space.
Oh, yeah.
And it has the two aliens who like getting high.
Yeah,
And crash a spaceship.
Yeah.
There's that. That's the fifth story. And then the sixth story was Tarna. And then there's the whole bridging narrative with the Lochnar. Okay, yeah, so that's pretty much, I think we pretty much covered it all.
Yeah, I think we did, yeah.
Alright, so any final thoughts, bro?
Go see the film. It definitely gets better with age. Like, if you watch it, say, now, and you watch it 10 years from now, it'll be better when you watch it 10 years from now.
And I'm going to be honest with you guys, the movie it's an animated film, but it is filled with a gratuitous amount of nudity and some sex, and if that's going to offend you or trigger you,
Don't go watch it.
I recommend you just skipping it.
Yeah.
But if you just want to check it out, like a really cool sci-fi fantasy story, then I totally recommend you checking it out if you have an open mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
Alright, everyone, until next time, have a good one. And remember to like, share, and subscribe and all that jazz. Bye.
Bye.